Hello, is this thing on? Hello everybody, Marty McConnell, the off-grid gecko here. The plant we're going to be working with today mainly is going to be this. Now this is a blackberry species. There are about 6 different species up on my hill. But we're not going to be talking about the blackberries themselves, we're going to be talking about the leaves. The leaves of blackberries and most things in family Rosacea, which is the roses, are incredibly nutritional, incredibly beneficial to your health, and they're just a wonderful sort of a, not really a cure-all. There are other plants that are better at that, but they are definitely a cure-a-lot. They've even been shown to be antiviral against hepatitis, or almost every variant of hepatitis, at least the ones that have been tested. I don't know if they've done testing for other viruses. Yeah, today we're, in addition to showing you this plant, because I'm pretty sure everybody can identify a blackberry, especially once the berries start forming, they have these leaves that will have anywhere from 3 to 7 little leaflets. They're little compound leaves like this. They're typically bigger leaves than a rose, and actually some varieties of blackberry, at least out here, produce very, very large leaves. The stem is another indicating factor. They are covered loosely with prickles. There's a bunch of prickles on there, but it's not like the gooseberry where it's just totally, spined up everywhere. The flowers on them, like a rose, are kind of white and they open up in a petal, and sometimes they have lots of little stamens in them. Ooh, good. And when I say rose, of course, I mean a real rose, a wild rose. So that's part of a blackberry blossom right there. I don't know if this thing's gonna auto zoom for me or not, but it's doing something. It's not doing what I want. But it's kind of like a rose. This one's got a little starburst pattern on it and white petals usually, though they can be pink or other colors. In order to make these into a medicine, and this is going to be like a daily tonic kind of thing, so the basic way to use these is as salad greens, or so in a salad, or lightly cooked like a vegetable. You just tear the leaves off like this and crush them up and throw them in. Typically these guys aren't too spiny on the leaf itself. There are a couple little spines on this one. Shouldn't be a big deal. You can also grind them up to make like a type of pesto. But as far as herbal uses, we are going to be making a tincture today. So I'm going to start by collecting a bunch of these leaves and maybe a little bit of stem, like some of the softer parts of the stem, like that. That's the whole top. That's basically it. You get yourself out some shears and you collect. Now when you're collecting leaves for the tincture, you can use blackberry, you can also use raspberry, you can use rose leaves, you can use grape leaves. All of these different leaves have very similar properties to each other. They're all just general good healing tonics, so you don't have to make too much distinction or fuss about one species. Just so you know, I'll show you a little difference here. So this is a blackberry leaf. Okay, like I said, usually anywhere from 3 to 7 leaflets per leaf. In the wild, blackberries have these long grooved stems, so if you have seedless blackberries that you got from the store, they may actually have a round stem. Hi kitty. But that's basically what you're gonna see. The spines come pretty much straight off the thing, and these spines on this one are actually pretty flimsy. It must be a young plant. This guy, you can kind of see, sort of resembles poison ivy a little bit. So if you don't know, just be careful with raspberries until you figure them out. The little spines are kind of characteristic on them. They got just a little tiny hook to them. The stem's smooth, and it's usually a very bright green. If you see red on here, that may be because of the sunlight. The bright green part is like a fuzz, so if you rub your finger on it, it actually wipes off. So it's like a little powder coat on the outside of the plant. And that's another identifying feature. If you are of the female variety, then you may want to familiarize yourself with this plant and the potential medicinal benefits. Alright, there we go. That's a little better. The camera was acting all crazy inside and like changing from light to dark. So Number one thing with making a tincture is alcohol. You want a particularly strong alcohol, and I'm going to tell you why. So now when it comes to alcohol, water, you're going to hear a lot of people say a lot of things. You're also going to hear people say that the herb needs to be gathered under a certain phase of the moon. It needs to be gathered under a certain day of the week, a certain hour of the day, a certain time in the calendar year, only from this type of dirt or that type of dirt, or under a certain planetary sign. I mean, there's a million things surrounding tinctures when you really get into it, and there's all these little... I've forgotten more about all this stuff than I ever want to know again. But here's your basic rundown. People seem to think that when you tincture an herb, for some reason some magical transformation happens, and that tincture is somehow more medicinally active, it's somehow enhanced, it's a special version of the herb. You always have to assume that you're extracting like the maximum amount of any potential toxin that's in that plant. That's why tinctures are sort of put on a respected level. Now, as far as whether you're concentrating or enhancing the quality of the medicine, that's another matter. In some cases like that, you would be getting a higher dosage than you would be if you had to go out and find a pound of that plant matter and you needed that much for a dosage. Like, it makes more sense to just take it in a tincture form, or to make a maceration or a decoction and drink it instead of doing all that chewing. But in general, doesn't really matter. You're going to be taking tinctures in small quantities, and the general... I've got a bottle here somewhere. So you've got this little 2-ounce bottle. Okay, you can buy these online. Inside the bottle, you want to have a little dropper, and if you take more than a dropper full... Sorry, I'm getting distracted. If you take more than a dropper full, you're probably taking too much. Like, a dropper full 3 times a day is more than enough for any of these if you're using as a medicinal remedy. Typically 10 little drops under the tongue, or in a glass of wine at night, or something of that nature. Like, that's more of your standard kind of dose, and that's generally agreed is safe. That's normally a preventative dose for something like we're doing here. So this is we'll call it a daily medicine. Put a few drops in your water at the end of the night or wherever, and go with it. So that's the first thing. These can concentrate certain qualities and certain aspects of the herb, but as far as eating the raw herb, you're going to get the exact same medicinal quality out of that. Like, if you only put a couple ounces of herb in a pot and you tincture it, versus putting that same couple of ounces into a bowl and eating it with a salad, you're going to get the same amount of medicine either way out of both of them. So it's not really concentrated in that respect. Like, you can't create more stuff than what's in the pot to begin with. That should just be common sense, but for some reason it isn't. Vodka is a perfectly acceptable alcohol for most tinctures. I use Everclear because vodka and Everclear are basically made the same way. Everclear is made with corn, vodka is made with potatoes. They ferment the crap out of it, and then they distill it, and you get a clear liquor that doesn't have a lot of residue from the original plant. So it's almost pure ethanol. Okay? And the same thing's true with vodka, except it's normally cut down to about 40% with water, with distilled water. So here's the next stigma. People think that different herbs need to be concocted with different amounts of water, and they will try and sell you on this idea, because a lot of this starts with marketing, right? It starts with companies that are trying to maximize the amount of this they have to buy, because obviously they can't use the stuff from the medical center. This has got to be food grade alcohol if they're going to sell it to you as a tincture. And I think that's kind of where some of this stuff sort of started up, and then it got picked up by a few books and a few herbal recipes and this and that. There is almost zero justification at all for watering down your alcohol, other than to stretch it and make it last longer. Now, your key factors here are you do want the final solution to be above 20% alcohol by volume. If it falls below that mark, and ideally you want it to be much higher than that, 30, 35, 40%, okay? Because if it falls below that mark, and I think the magic number is about 20 to 25%, then all of a sudden your little tincture can actually go bad. Bacteria can get in there and they can start converting the alcohol into vinegar, and then your herbal solution will just rot inside that bottle. The reason we use alcohol for tinctures, the real reason, the main reason, is alcohol is a way to preserve certain qualities of the plant so that they have a long, stable shelf life without drying them. So this is a bowl of plant matter that I just collected. These are all the blackberry leaves, and there's some raspberry in there and some grapes, and I added some stuff. But you've got your plant matter here. Now these leaves on these types of plants are pretty dry. I mean, you pick them up, you can feel them, they're like papery, they're very, very thin. There's not a lot of water in here. Any plant matter is 80 to 90% water. Some are even higher. Succulents are incredibly water soaked. All your fruits and vegetables, they're just loaded down with water. So the plant matter itself has a high amount of water content in there. So when you mix it with the alcohol, that water content that's in the plant is going to go into your solution. So if you're using a succulent or something that's kind of squishy, think of like a cactus type plant, or leaves that are really big and bulky, then you definitely want to use a higher grade alcohol, higher strength alcohol with those if you're preparing them fresh, or you pop them in the dehydrator for a little while, or dry them in the sun, or whatever you have to do to get the moisture content down. Because if you add all that water, it's going to dilute your alcohol. And if you're using vodka and you're using a big succulent plant and you just throw it in there fresh, you may actually drop the final solution down below that 20% limit. There are also certain qualities of a plant that alcohol extracts that water won't. If you do an extract of black pepper, for example, piperine is one of the chemicals that comes out in alcohol. And in some of your tinctures, you're going to notice, if you take your little dropper and you put a couple drops in water, you're going to see this little cloud form. Okay, and that cloud, sometimes it'll redissolve itself quite quickly. Sometimes that stuff will settle down to the bottom of the glass, and you'll be like, "What gives? What's the deal with that?" It's because a lot of the chemicals that you can extract with the alcohol are actually highly water phobic. So, whereas a water extraction, you're only going to get the stuff that's extractable with water. Alcohol extractions tend to extract a lot more things that aren't soluble in water. You're going to get a lot of the water-soluble components too, because water-soluble things tend to go over in alcoholic solutions. And like I said, this is going to be diluted to some degree by the natural water in the plant, any water you use to wash the plant matter or whatever. But going the other way around, there are things that you have to have a really high concentration of alcohol to extract. And once the alcohol percentage drops even to 50% or 60%, that stuff starts coming out of solution and just dropping out. So keep that in mind. So the higher the alcohol percentage, generally the better. I like to maintain anywhere from 40 to 80% in the final product. Sometimes I like to just go as high as I can. So the main thing is the preservative effect, and the other main thing is higher alcohol percentages are going to extract certain things, and that's only in certain plants. Okay, like black pepper, it's kind of a necessary thing if you want that active ingredient in particular. If you're trying to get that out with your extract, then it's got to go over. Same thing with turmeric. If you're making an extract of turmeric, it pays to have extra alcohol in the solution, because water's just not going to do the trick sometimes. I think that covers the basics. So on that note, I am going to go ahead and prepare these by washing them, rinsing them a little bit. Okay, we're back. What I'm going to do is commit another mortal sin of the modern herbal world. Good, it works. I am going to use Mr. Food Processor here to grind these little suckers up. Now, this is the reason why. A tincture which is what we're making here. I'm also going to make a little decoction over here, but it's not muddy things up. A tincture is a type of maceration. So what you're essentially doing is you're throwing the plant matter into a liquid solution, and that plant matter is already starting to break down. Even in the pot, it's breaking down. Cell walls are falling apart. The little interior guts of the plant are starting to mix. The juices are evolving. I can't remember the names of those types of chemicals right now, but there's like these little protochemicals, and then there's it usually ends with the sound A's that attacks those things, and normally those are separated inside of the cell. And when the maceration process starts, like, those things break free and they're free to mix, and that produces these usually volatile or aromatic compounds from the plant, like in garlic. Alanine, I think, is converted to allicin whenever you damage the plant body, and that's what gives you that garlicky smell. So there's some of that going on. There's other plant juices that are mixing up. Shredding the plants, or even just sticking them in a pot and pummeling them to bruise the leaves or whatever, kind of kickstarts that process, and it's going to make your tincture evolve faster. Alright, so I've got another experiment running over here, and I can now say with certainty that the thorns definitely do not boil off. So if you're going to eat these fresh, you got to do something to probably just scrape the bottom of the leaves with the knife, just to make sure there's no thorns in them. Sure, once they're in your stomach, they're fine, but yeah, you don't want to be biting into prickles. It's no fun. So I had to run these through twice, and some of it's still not mashed up quite to my liking, but a lot of people use mason jars, and I tend to agree. Mason jars are awesome for them. You might notice I'm making quite a bit of this. In general, you don't need that much, and you can usually just pulverize this stuff by hand and, you know, smash it between a couple rocks and save this water because I'm going to use it in a minute. So this is another method of maceration, and this is usually how decoctions start, is by soaking in water, so making a water extract of the herb. And typically that involves either doing a cold infusion like this one right here, or you can use the cooking method to make a hot brew tea, which is also called a decoction if you are not using tea bags. So I was going to reserve this video specifically for tinctures, but I've got this right here, so let's talk about cold infusions. So when it comes to plant medicines, your very basic plant medicines are, number one, eat the plant. Number two, like with something like yarrow, if you're going to put it on a cut, just mash up the leaf in your hand, spit on it, rub it on the cut, and you're good to go. Make sure so you get those juices packed in, or put something over it like some tape or something to hold it in place. Those are your basic plant medicines. Now, as far as tonics and cold infusions, this is how you do it. You crush up the plant some way or another. You can rub it between a couple rocks, you can grind it up in there, you can put it in your little Nutrimill, whatever. Mash it up pretty good and pour cold water over it, and as you can see, the juices are extracted. So this is, you might want to filter it, but this is our little tonic water. Cheers. It's actually pretty good. Especially with this, you probably want to filter it, because I don't know if I just ingested a bunch of prickles or not. We'll find out in a minute. The next step up from that would be a tea, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. If you don't have empty tea bags, you can take coffee filters and sort of bundle the stuff up in there, and just tie the top of the coffee filter and drop it in hot water. Let it steep for 5 to 10 minutes. You got tea. You can also do that with dried herbs, but fresh herbs also. And again, you may want to mash them up because you want it to be a fast process. Alright, so with tinctures, for some reason everybody wants to use the whole plant, or they want to use the dried plant, and that's fine. Tinctures, you can get away with that. This other stuff, it's a little harder to get away with it if it's not crushed up, or at least dried at a minimum. So for our tincture, what we want to do is take some of our finely ground stuff, dried or wet. If you want to use dried herbs, then it's best to dry them before the crushing up process. And that is going to make a ton right there. And you don't want to put a lot in here, okay? You want to leave airspace. So some people say you need to leave like an inch of airspace at the top. Really, how much tincture are you trying to make? Okay. And you take your bottle of alcohol, either grain alcohol like this that I'm using, or vodka or any other kind of clear liquor. Don't really want to use anything that's flavored. You're not mixing a cocktail here. So drink it straight clear alcohol, and as I'm sure you can see, it is already infusing quite well. Now this is going to go through a couple of color changes while it's macerating. Let me find a lid for this guy. There's a ring. I have no lids. I'll find a lid in a minute. Put that up there for now. So you put that in there, pop a lid on it. You can use a mason jar, you can use an old pickle jar, you can use a plastic tub, you can use anything. If you're using plastic, you want to use something food grade. So most of the boxes that you buy food in, if they come in a plastic jar or something, are made of PTFE, which is suitable for chemical stuff. And it should be just fine with that. And you're going to let that sit. Now the first change you're going to notice, and you want to come back and kind of shake this up every day or two, just to make sure that that alcohol stays on top of everything and it's thoroughly soaked in so you don't get any molds or anything. And then when you come back to it, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to darken. This is going to turn almost black when you're looking at it. That's why I use mason jars, because when you look at it from the side, it'll actually look completely black. That's a good sign that it's pretty much done. Sometimes it won't get to that point, sometimes it will. Just have to watch it. Your basic rule of thumb, if you've ground up the herb, you know, let it steep for at least a couple days. It's better to let it go for a couple weeks. If you're using whole herbs, you want to let it sit in there longer to where that maceration process can really complete itself. Like all the lipids and the cell walls and the cellulose, all that stuff has to break down. So this is decomposing matter. Alright, it's just decomposing in kind of a clean way where there aren't organisms involved. This is just the plant decomposing itself, digesting itself, if you will. Basically, the longer it sits, the better. 6 weeks with any kind of concoction, you're going to be good to go, and you're going to have something like this. So what you want to do with this is probably strain it first and then filter it. Alright, so straining. I've got a little cheap strainer here. I've got a little intermediary pickle jar. And basically I'm going to put this in here, and I'm going to set this over the sink because I always manage to spill some. And this is another tincture that's actually been sitting here for weeks now, marinating. And this is red sorrel, in case you're wondering, because it's delicious. And it smells kind of crazy, actually. It smells like a tincture. So I'm going to start by just pouring that in there and get all the alcohol to go through, and the straining process just basically keeps your filter from clogging up later. Okay, this stuff you can discard. If you want to make a spagyric tincture, that's going to a whole nother level, but basically this leftover plant matter is what you use to create the ashes that you extract the potassium from and then put it back into the mixture. We're not getting into that today. Before we get on with the straining, whoa, I'm all glitchy. Before we get on with the straining, this is our tincture. I actually just shook it up so you probably can't tell, but it's a very light limey green color. That's usually how most of them start off, especially when you're using herbs. And once it clears up, like, you'll be able to see through it a little bit. It actually looks quite pretty. But what you want to do with this is put it somewhere out of the light, especially out of the sunlight. So I just have a dark corner down here. I stick these in here. That way they're out of the way, and I don't have to worry about it. So anyways, in a couple weeks, whenever you're ready, you can use an ordinary kitchen filter or an ordinary kitchen funnel, a little coffee filter, in there. Alright, you don't have to have a lab set up. This is just something I do a lot, so it's easier to have this stuff. Then I've got my solution that I already ran through the strainer, so this has been strained, but if you look down in there, you'll see like it's kind of cloudy and it's got a bunch of stuff in it. So what you want to do is filter that. Okay. And when you filter it, you'll notice when it comes out, it's going to look a little more yellow and a little less green, because all that green plant matter in there is coloring the solution, but the tincture itself might be yellow or brown or red, or just depends on whatever plant you were using and what you did to it. But it comes out almost like a little golden color, and then once you've got it filtered, then you can go ahead and put it in your little dropper bottle. Just get that guy under there, and you can use any means necessary to get this in here. I use a separatory funnel because it's easy and quick and I can get a good measurement. Bottle number 1 of red sorrel, and I'm going to have to label these guys later. Always label your stuff. Always put it in a brown or a blue bottle. That will keep some of the sunlight from getting to this and affecting this, because sunlight will screw these things up over time, and keep them in a dark place, again, out of the sunlight, because sunlight's bad for tinctures. Actually, I'm just going to put that over here. And anyways, this will go into my beer tonight, or whatever. It's just a handy thing to have around. I don't remember the exact medical list for red sorrel, so I'm not going to get into it. But yeah, that's it. If you notice your filters coming up, there's a couple tricks you can do. You can grab the filter paper and pick it up, because sometimes if the liquid gets around on the inside of the funnel, it'll actually kind of stop it up and it won't want to flow easy. If you're having trouble filtering and it's really just going slow and lifting the paper trick doesn't work, you can always take the funnel out, pour it back in the dish that you started with, and then swap your filter paper, because that filter can get clogged up enough that nothing will flow. So that's your standard tincture, and then you can take 5 to 10 drops a day. With most tinctures is more than enough, and that'll be enough to get you going. You can put the dropper under your tongue. Sometimes you can go with a whole dropper full. You just have to examine your tincture, look up some recipes, see what people are recommending. Alright, that pretty much covers tinctures, I think. If you're interested in more stuff like this, I'm going to keep finding new plants. We're going to be doing some more off-grid stuff. I'm going to be doing some more mowing with my scythe. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell your friends. I gotta go. The battery's dead. I'll talk to you later. Stay tuned for more, and keep coming back and subscribe and all that fun stuff. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.